Now, the last type of modifier I want to talk about doesn't really alter the quality of light, but it definitely alters the colour of light, and that's gels. Now, this is obviously, as with this entire lighting course, only a brief overview and introduction to how gels work. If shooting with lighting gels is something that interests you and you like the effects you get, I highly recommend checking out a photographer and teacher by the name of Jake Hicks. Should be pretty easy to find on the interwebs, as he is an expert not only in shooting this sort of stuff, but in teaching it, and highly recommended. So let's talk a little bit about gels. Like so many things in this course, I've hinted and talked about gels quite a few times, but not really gone into any depth, so probably about time. They're called gels because they used to be made of gelatin. Nowadays they don't tend to be, they're more made of polyester. I wouldn't let that worry you though, that's kind of a pub quiz bit of trivia to know there. Not that important when it comes to lighting. Gels, I suppose, aren't really modifiers, they don't alter the quality of your light, but of course they do alter the colour of your light. You can either use them for official sort of colour correction purposes, which we'll come on to in just a second, or you can use them simply to create swathes of colour. Now, starting with colour correction, there are three types: green, orange and blue. What these do is they take a colour temperature and correct it to a different colour temperature. So if you were starting with a flash gun, which is set for, let's say, 5,500 Kelvin, if you put a full colour temperature orange onto this light, you've now made it much, much warmer. You've effectively made it a tungsten light. So if your camera white balance is set for tungsten and you're in a room that's lit by tungsten light, this will now look the same colour as those tungsten lights do. Colour temperature blue takes tungsten lights and makes them the same colour temperature as daylight. And something called window green takes daylight and makes it the same colour as fluorescent tubes, although this is a bit vague because this is kind of old school technology. Increasingly nowadays fluorescent tubes are nearly daylight balanced, or could be all sorts of different colours, but if you're in a room with very old-fashioned fluorescent tubes and you want to use flashes, or perhaps you want to gel the whole window and use some daylight to mix in with the fluorescent tube light, this is what you need to make your daylight balanced lights or flashes the same colour as fluorescent tubes. Now, all of these colour correction gels come in different strengths. They'll come in full, half, or quarter, and even down to an eighth. And of course, what they do is alter the colour temperature incrementally. You may find you need to fine-tune things. They don't quite work with just one full gel. You might need a gel and a quarter, okay? But you can just buy them in different strengths and then adjust them to fit. Now, we've covered how you use these before, of course. You've seen how I put gel on a flash gun inside a tungsten lit room to enable the flash gun to come down to that colour temperature and allow me to set the camera to a tungsten white balance and shoot consistently whilst mixing two different light sources. And a couple of quick pointers about using them. One of the main pointers is make sure when you gel your lights, you gel them fully. Make sure you totally cover that light, okay? If you only sort of half cover it or leave bits showing, obviously we're going to get a different mix of colours. You want to make this totally orange or totally whichever colour you're gelling. Now, secondly, when gelling lights, on a practical level, it makes sense to gel the smallest lights you can because it's going to be quicker and easier. This is why you see flash guns being gelled, but perhaps not the lights in the ceiling. This should state the obvious, I appreciate, but think about it in practical terms. You walk into a room, a great big empty gym or something, and it's lit by tungsten lights, but you want to mix your flashes with it as well. Well, it's a much simpler job to put a little bit of CTO, colour temperature orange, onto your flashes and make them the same colour as the tungsten lights than it is to get hold of lots of colour temperature blue and have to get hold of a ladder from the caretaker, go up into the ceiling and gel every single light source in the ceiling to make your tungsten the same colour as daylight, only to have to go back and take it all down afterwards. Okay, so on a practical level, if you're mixing sources, gel the smallest source you can. Now, of course, there's nothing to stop you using these colour correction gels for creative reasons. I frequently whack, perhaps not a full CTO, but often a half CTO onto my lights just to give them a bit of warmth. And I've even been known to put a full CTB onto my flashes to create a cool ice effect, like in this shot. Gels come in a huge range of different colours. You've got the basic colour correction ones, and then you can get all sorts of wacky colours for creating daft effects. I've been known to do this now and again because it can jazz up an otherwise very, very boring shot. You can buy them in whole sheets that are about this big, which you then attach to, say, larger lights like studio flashes and bigger battery power flashes. What's frequently common nowadays is you can buy them in little packs like this that are designed for flash guns. And when you combine them with a handy little Velcro strap like this, and you have sticky little Velcro dots on the back, they just fit on ever so easily. Very, very handy, very, very convenient, and of course, very, very lightweight and portable. A whole kit of these takes up no space in your bag. The whole kit costs, I think, 15 or 20 pounds, and you've got an enormous range of options with just a very small portable kit like that. Attaching gels to your lights is pretty easy. In the case of small little kits like this, as we've already seen, you just take the Velcro bits and attach them together. With larger lights, like this 1 kilowatt tungsten I've got here, you may find that the barn doors come with little clips like that, whereby you can take the large sheets of gel and simply slide them in place. Always good doing demos live on camera, like that. And then they gel over thusly. Or you can, of course, tape them on, although beware that tape can melt with hot lights like this 1 kilowatt. Or you can simply take crocodile clips and clip them in place. Now, a couple of catches to warn you about with gels. Any gel will obviously affect the colour of your light, but it's also going to affect the quantity to some extent. Take a look at this range of colour temperature blue filters, going from quarter, half to full, and it's obvious that this one is cutting a lot of light, and these are cutting some light, but not as much. Now, of course, you must bear this in mind. Quantity of light is going to factor into how you put your shot together. There are in fact gels that do nothing but stop light, what are called neutral density gels. Here's one right now. This is totally colourless, or it should be anyway. What this does is basically block light. Now you're probably thinking, why on earth do I want to do that? Why would I have lights like this and then simply want to block light coming from them and cut the power of them? Well, there are actually a few reasons. One of which would be things like this 1 kilowatt tungsten light. Now I'm not going to plug it in because I'm holding it in my hot little hand, but this is 1 kilowatt of tungsten continuous light, but it has no power control. It's either on or off. Now obviously we can reduce the quantity by bouncing it off something or increasing the distance in some way, or we can reduce the quantity of light coming from it by putting neutral density gel over the front. Okay, so they do have a purpose, despite it seeming a bit odd. And of course these, just like your colour temperature gels, come in different strengths. You can have them 1 stop, I think all the way up to about 6 stops, whereby they're almost completely opaque. Last little warning with gels, and relevant to lights like this, is beware that they can melt. Obviously a light like this gets very hot very quickly. Okay, if you tape a gel onto a light like this, yeah, you'll probably smell something fairly soon and you realise that basically the glue in the tape is melting. This might be melting too. They're not going to catch fire. That's why they're now polyester, not gelatin. You won't burn the place down. But I can't tell you how many times over the years I've been working away with perhaps these lights or something similar and, hang on, yep, and that's the smell of dust from these starting to burn and the polyester in this starting to melt. At extreme levels, you can even melt these with flashes, but you have to have been firing the flash at full power an awful lot for that to happen. The way you get round it is, first of all, be watching for it, but when you mount them onto lights, try and allow as much space as you can so that there's room for the air to circulate. You know, never place them right onto a light housing itself because they'll just melt in no time at all. So there you go, a quick overview of modifiers. I really don't want to get too caught up in specific makes, specific brands, and the difference between a smaller softbox, a medium softbox, a large softbox, all that sort of thing, because hopefully you understand the basic principle, which is that all modifiers do is offer you a convenient way of making the light softer or harder. Although, of course, what really generally happens with modifiers that make the light harder is in fact you're really just controlling the fall of where the light goes. And gels, as an extra thing, allow you to control the colour of light and also to some extent the quantity of light.
Now, one last little thing before I sign off on this section, something that I have mentioned before, but I'm keen to really stress it, and that is that don't assume a certain modifier is going to be a magic bullet. It's particularly tempting nowadays with the plethora of behind-the-scenes videos and how-to videos out on the internet that you see a photographer, you see a shot they've taken, you think, oh, that's amazing, and you watch how they did it, and they say, yes, I used a beauty dish, duh, 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 duh. And you think, right, the answer to my problems is a beauty dish. I need to go and buy a beauty dish. And you go and you spend 150 quid on one, and your stuff looks nothing like theirs. That's because, of course, the exact components of that precise shot you were basing it on are probably not the same as the ones you're using now, and you're probably not even using the beauty dish in the same way. If you try and exactly recreate how they did it, if you have the same sort of size beauty dish, and it's the same distance from the subject, and it's balanced the lights in the same way, yeah, you'll probably get a similar looking effect. But if you simply just go out and buy a beauty dish, and I'm just using beauty dish as an example, but I hope you get my point, if you simply buy one and then just whack it any old place, 20 feet from your subject rather than 5 feet from your subject, or at a different angle, well, of course you won't get the same result. Okay? You can probably guess I'm saying this because this is a rabbit hole I have fallen down myself many times in the past. I hope you can avoid this trap. Don't assume that just going out and buying a certain modifier will totally transform your work. They're just tools, they just help you to do your job that little bit better.
Okay, that's a very quick overview as to how gels work. Don't forget, if you want to know more, Jake Hicks is the person to check out. Next week, what I'm going to do is take you through building a lit image step by step in very, very granular detail. Hopefully that will help to bring together an awful lot of the stuff we've covered so far in the course. See you then.